What's up, Taiwan? I'm Rik Glauert with news from here in Taiwan and around the world. A measles outbreak in Taiwan is growing, with a hospital in central Taiwan reporting 3 new cases in a cluster infection. The country's Centers for Disease Control says the cluster is contained to the hospital with 19 cases so far and has not seen evidence of it spreading. The new infections bring the total number of measles cases in the country this year to 36. The disease is not common in Taiwan, as most residents are vaccinated against it. The death toll from wildfires raging across Southern California has risen to 11. Firefighters are still struggling to contain multiple fires as 150,000 people remain under mandatory evacuation orders. Tiffany Wong reports.
Longtime Pacific Palisades resident Maria Demina says goodbye to the ruins of her home, destroyed by the fires still raging through the coastal area of Southern California.
To see this, we actually came to say thank you to our house for being good to us, and we were good to it. So, kind of end of a life story here, and then another life will begin.
Demina's neighborhood was decimated by the largest of the wildfires that have set much of Los Angeles County ablaze for days, spurred by dry conditions and high winds. Better wind conditions on Friday helped fire crews bring the Palisades fire on the West Coast to 8% containment, while the Eaton fire in East LA is only 3% contained. As of Friday evening local time, at least 11 people have been killed in the fires, with the death toll expected to rise once emergency crews are cleared to search the ruins. Thousands of buildings and entire neighborhoods have been destroyed, and over 150,000 people are under mandatory evacuation orders. Another 160,000 face evacuation warnings as the fires continue their path of destruction. The LA County Police Department has also announced a curfew from 6 p.m. to 6 a.m. to prevent looting in evacuation areas.
Enforcing a curfew is an important tool that will help keep the burn areas and the evacuated properties secure, keeping looters out. This effort also helps protect public safety personnel who are operating in darkness in very difficult conditions.
The police chief says the National Guard will be sent in to help with traffic control in affected areas. As thick clouds of smoke hung over the city, volunteers came together to distribute food, clothing, and toiletries to those in need, as they tried to cheer up displaced residents with some much-needed warmth from the community. Dolphine Chen and Tiffany Wong for TaiwanPlus.
Venezuelan President Nicolás Maduro has been sworn in for a 3rd term, but local opposition and many in the international community are calling it an illegitimate power grab. Maduro appeared before supporters outside the presidential palace in Caracas to celebrate his inauguration. He mocked exiled opposition leader González Urrutia, who is recognized by most Latin American nations and the US as the legitimate winner of last year's elections. Maduro has held the presidential office since 2013, though an ongoing economic crisis has caused his popularity to plummet. The US is offering a $25 million bounty for his arrest. US chipmaker Nvidia has strongly condemned potential new restrictions on exports of chips used for artificial intelligence. The move, first reported by Bloomberg, is seen as a last-minute push by the outgoing Biden administration to limit advanced tech from going to adversaries like Russia and China. For more on this, reporter Rik Glauert spoke with senior fellow at the Center for Strategic and International Studies, Bharat Haritas, in Washington, D.C.
There's been reports of new U.S. export controls on AI hardware and software that would apply not only to China, as it often has in the past, but to much of the world. Now, the rules haven't been officially released yet, but what's your understanding of what they might look like?
Of course, at this stage, it's entirely speculative, but this might be the most far-reaching round of export controls yet. So effectively, to break it down, there's going to be 3 tiers. So on one end, there's going to be a group of countries, China included, as well as I understand about a dozen or 2 dozen arms embargoed countries, you will not be allowed to sell GPUs to them at all, advanced GPUs. And then there's going to be a tier one of countries. These are close US allies. I believe there are roughly 20 countries. So for these countries, there will be no restrictions applied. And then there's going to be a band of countries in the middle, effectively the rest of the world, where there's going to be a cap on the number of GPUs that can be sold to those respective countries. I understand the figure currently is roughly 50,000. And these numbers will be from 2025 to 2027. But there's also a little clause where if you're a US hyperscaler and you are able to apply for a validated end user license, you'll be able to get more GPUs above the 50,000.
Some of the big chip companies like NVIDIA have already come out with some pretty strongly worded statements opposing these reported new controls. What kind of impact could these controls have on chip makers like NVIDIA?
I think just the sheer compliance sort of scaling that will be required. I mean, countries are already struggling just with export controls targeted narrowly at just China. And now we're looking at a sort of a global expansion of this problem. I mean, countries are already dealing with illicit diversion, transshipment, smuggling issues, shell companies, and now you're basically saying, well, let's multiply this by 150 times. And so this is going to be very difficult and challenging on companies, I think. For China, for example, NVIDIA was projected to sell up to 1 million or 2 million GPUs to just China. And now you think about the rest of these countries, 50,000 is a relatively small number. The largest clusters, single cluster GPU clusters in the US are currently 100,000. So I think it's hard to believe that it will not affect the bottom line.
These new rules would be coming out in what are really the final days of the Biden administration. What's your view on how the incoming Trump administration might handle this? Will they keep these rules in place? Will they make them even more severe? Any predictions?
Now, the Trump question is interesting because many of these export controls actions were initially taken under the Trump administration. I think for China, the real 9/11 moment happened in 2019. Huawei and ZTE had sanctions placed on them. I believe Huawei was forced to get off the Android market as well. So I think it's likely the export controls will continue in some fashion. But for the more expensive ones, the ones that are less business friendly, arguably the upcoming one, it is quite possible that Trump might decide that this is not in the best interest of the business community or doesn't help the competitiveness of companies like NVIDIA.
That was Rik Glauert speaking with CSIS fellow Bharat Haritas. TSMC has comfortably beaten market forecasts for its fourth quarter revenue. The chip giant posted just over $26 billion in revenue from October through December. It comes days after the company's stock price hit a record high of $35 a share on Taiwan's benchmark index, the TAIEX. TSMC is a key supplier for NVIDIA and Apple. The company's strong performance comes as demand for AI surges. An indigenous community in southeastern Taiwan is protesting a hotel development project in their village. Members of a Pinyu Mayan community in Taitung County gathered in front of the Environment Ministry in Taipei, calling out its approval of the project's environmental impact review. Protesters say the plan to build a resort complex infringes on their rights and disrespects their culture.
先祖安息的地方，我们没有办法容许在它的上面盖饭店、盖度假村。
The hotel's developer says the project will bring economic benefits to the local community. An official from southeastern Taiwan has held an unsanctioned meeting with a high-level official in Beijing. Taidong County Chief Rao Qingling led a delegation to China last week to promote Taidong-grown fruit. There, she met with Taiwan Affairs Office Head Song Tao. Taiwan's Mainland Affairs Council said Thursday that Rao had not reported the meeting to them in advance and that she could be barred from going to China again in her official capacity. But Rao says the meeting came as a surprise.
我们事先也不知道啊，我们落地的时候才知道啊。陆委会梁文杰副主委的连连看，说实在的，我也不知道啊。陆委会自己的连连看，我认为他们要自己去解释。
Rao says she used the meeting with Song to ask for a tariff reduction on custard apples from Taidong. Taiwan's toads and frogs are in a tough spot as invasive species outcompete them on their home turf. But an army of volunteers guided by wildlife experts is helping push back. John Van Triest reports.
It's a miserable wet night in the mountains of Taitung, but a team of volunteers equipped with rain gear, headlamps, and nets is walking the soggy hillside trails with purpose. It doesn't take long for them to find their targets, cane toads. These plump frog-like creatures, native to Latin America, were brought into Taiwan through the pet trade. Now, as in other places, they've established themselves in the wild as a stubborn nuisance. They eat valuable insects, pose a risk to dogs and cats with their poison glands, and both outcompete and prey on Taiwan's native amphibians. At first, these strange new creatures were a mystery to people like team leader Zheng Limian, who first came across them in a vegetable plot in 2021. But it was soon clear these were unlike anything from her home in central Taiwan.
那个时候你发现是觉得说没有看过这个东西啦，蛮可贵的。
有，是我是先问阮学校的老师，我问伊啊，伊再给我问2次的，
所以就发现说这个问题是要赶快来解决这样。
She's since been a part of a corps of volunteers trying to find a solution to the pests. Near Zheng's hometown of Caotun alone, they've caught over 30,000 cane toads with nets and bags like these. The toads are sent on to the Agriculture Ministry's Taiwan Biodiversity Research Institute for cataloging. The toads are then placed into a cold environment where they enter a hibernation state and are then frozen, never to wake again. Researchers say this is a humane way to deal with a pressing ecological problem. The institute is also working on traps that can supplement the labor-intensive process of catching toads with nets. No country where cane toads have been introduced and become a problem has managed to eradicate them. But researchers like Lin Chunfu say making Taiwan the first is a worthy goal.
鸣声是吸引海蟾蜍的一个重要的信号那我们用录音带播放，所以用鸣声当作一个陷阱来捕抓，是我们最近常用的方式。
Cane toads aren't the only invasive amphibian Taiwan is struggling to contain. Since 2006, the spot-legged tree frog, native to China and Southeast Asia, has been rapidly outcompeting local frog species and pushing them from their habitats. Since 2011, Yang Yiru, associate professor at National Donghua University, has helped lead the pushback against them. These invasive frogs produce enormous numbers of eggs, in clumps of up to 1,000 at a time, and they can reproduce 5 times a year. This is why Professor Yang's approach relies on stopping their growth from the tadpole stage.
那我们现在把它放了一些苦茶粉，是一种有机的资材。
Camellia seed powder kills them directly without harming the environment. And in hard-to-reach breeding grounds, like in among thickets, a solution with 16% citric acid will do the trick too. Another important part of her approach is bringing the whole family into the process of catching mature frogs, so that even the youngest children learn about the importance of protecting Taiwan's ecology as she did during her childhood.
我小时候在乡下到处都是蛙，可是我刚刚说在20-30年前就发觉了台湾的蛙类的族群就下降了，就开始进行了一些保育。然后我觉得一个人做也来不及哈，如果每个人都可以保护住家附近的蛙类，那我们台湾全部的蛙类其实就可以被保护下来了。我们来看一下抓到几只，来算一下公的母的这样。
Though the speed at which the frogs breed makes catching them all or reversing their damage difficult, teams like this hope to at least make a dent, preventing a complete takeover of Taiwan's ecosystems and leaving a space in them for the local species that have long called the island home. Luffy Li and John Van Triest for TaiwanPlus.
Thank you for watching What's Up Taiwan. Finally today we take you to Taiwan's highest mountains, where a cold snap has blanketed the subtropical peaks in white. I'm Rik Glauert, take care, and we will see you next time.